Hello? So I've been thinking, Matthew. No one really wants just anyone narrating for these types of stories. They want someone with some character, some passion to really light a fire in their dimming attention spans and heavy eyelids. Stop calling here, dude. For the 1000th time, I don't take video suggestions from just anyone, especially someone I don't even know. Never mind all that. You need to listen to me. No one wants a dying kindling on a cold night, or a grim tale during their wedding day. This is supposed to be— Enough. Look, just leave me alone, okay? This is the 5th time you've called here this week, and I'm getting stuck having to listen to your senseless dribble. I'm in the middle of editing the new bone-chilling stories video, and I don't need any distractions. Especially from some fucking lunatic. Alright? You'll talk to me. One way or another. I look forward to it, creep. What? I like that new NT1 microphone, by the way. The color really complements that blue shirt of yours. Wait, what? You're so close I can smell you. Well, now that he is thoroughly scared shitless, let's continue on with the show, shall we? What if aliens don't like tacos? Chelsea suddenly spoke, stirring me from my momentary malaise of the heavens and drawing my attention back to the terrestrial. My eyes shot to her, but she continued staring up at the night sky, head resting tenderly on her clasped hands behind her head. The grass of the meadow rolled serenely in the light breeze. What? Aliens, she again clarified. What if they don't like tacos? I pondered the philosophic conundrum for a moment, unable to stifle the chuckle. Why would they not like tacos? Well, I mean, they probably never tried them, you know? Plus, their physiology could be altogether incompatible. If they're not carbon-based organisms, for instance, then tacos could be equivalent to cyanide for them. Her verdant eyes locked upon mine, and the two of us broke into a mutual laugh. It always amazed me how someone as well-read and passionate as Chelsea could seamlessly blend two radically different topics into a single conversation that actually made sense. I'd always tell her she was like riding a pogo stick, inspiring and goofy all at once. I guess they'll just have to eat chicken nuggets instead. I winked at her, alluding to an inside joke between us that had lasted several years. She just rolled her eyes and looked back into the vast Milky Way galaxy, gleaming with all its splendor in the night sky. Can I ask you something? Honestly? I thought for a moment and responded the only way that seemed appropriate. No. I turned to meet her gaze, only to find her sneering back. Where are they? I mean, why do you think they haven't come here? I didn't have a good answer for her then, and had no way of knowing how close we were to finding it out. Nor did I have any idea that it would be the last personal moment we would share. I should have made more of the moment, and memories do not fill the void. The next day came, and the two of us woke early to get into the lab before the others. We wanted to be the first there in case Bob had finally gone critical. Bob, in this case, was Chelsea's nickname for a star we had been observing for many years. Its true name, Hydra 3267b, didn't exactly roll off the tongue, and so Bob had become the shorthand. For over 13 years, we had been glued to our monitors checking for every infinitesimal change in behavior. Bob was classified as a white hypergiant star, approximately 93 times as large as our own sun, and calculated at over 167,000 light-years from Earth. As you might have guessed, Bob was incredibly unique. Initial observation noted a large debris cloud that fogged the imagery equipment. It also seemed to pulse every once in a while, emitting sudden flares and gamma-ray bursts. The star was highly unstable, and found to be expelling enormous bouts of matter at a torrid rate. Chelsea was the one who first discovered it, and from the get-go, She seemed oddly entranced by it. Maybe she had a gut feeling, or maybe she really was the prodigy that so many believed her to be. She first spoke the theory that we had all began to subconsciously suspect. Bob the star was on the verge of going supernova. The claim was met with immediate skepticism from the others. Once they analyzed the data for themselves, though, they were unable to come to a concise conclusion, as no one knows for sure what the progenitor's signs actually are. Some chose to corroborate her conclusion, but most abstained from decision. Chelsea didn't seem to care one way or another. She held firm in her belief that Bob was a ticking time bomb and rapidly running out of fuse. Out of all the advancements in the field of astronomy over the last couple of decades, we had yet to witness a live supernova. The last person to do so was Johannes Kepler himself, back in 1604, and that was before telescopes had even been invented. There are remnants in the forms of nebulas and black holes, yet the event itself had yet to be recorded with modern equipment. Finding a supernova in time to witness its explosion is like finding a single grain of sugar in a beach composed of all the sand on Earth. There are mountains of hypothetical scenarios, but we still don't know exactly how they work, and that was what made Bob, Hydra, 3267b, so valuable. The two of us marched into the lab, lattes spiked with espresso shots to give us the energy needed to face another Monday. We had only just set cast off our coats and dried from the rain when Levi burst into the room. "Finally, you guys got here. I've been trying to reach you all morning." I greeted him with a yawn and glanced down to my phone, revealing several missed calls and texts. "Levi, it's too early for phone calls. You know this by now," I replied. Levi chuckled and shook his head, adjusting the glasses on his face. "Well, you picked a bad day to default to your laziness." The grin then grew wide upon his face, and I could see the excitement sparkle in his eyes. It happened. Chelsea suddenly jolted to attention, her green eyes quivering inquisitively. "You mean?" She couldn't even finish the thought. Levi just nodded and quickly beckoned us towards the array station. "It was last night at 2 a.m., Levi spoke, looking over his shoulder as we hurried to the terminal. I chuckled to myself, because, of course, it had finally happened when we weren't there to see it live. Levi punched in some commands and the computer began to load. I watched the display screen rotate around the familiar map of the cosmos and pinpoint our specified coordinates. The lens slowly began to zoom into a point of light, which grew more luminous and further pronounced with each passing frame. It soon reached the point in which the entire screen was engulfed by the effervescent blast, and that was when I knew it was real. "Is this it?" Chelsea asked. Levi nodded and pointed towards the screen. "This is the location in which Hydra 3267b was previously located." He then paused and shot a proud glance to both Chelsea and I. "Bob is gone." His words were met only with stunned silence from the two of us. All the late nights running simulation programs and checking the data over ad nauseum. All the years we had spent waiting and hoping for the opportunity of a lifetime. It was all worth it. Bob had gone supernova. We had a telescope that was oriented to monitor their particular splotch of sky 24/7 in hopes of seeing it. Luckily, we did that too, as otherwise it would have passed without us being able to watch. Levi quickly rewound the feed, and as the frames went by, the light shrunk inward and coalesced back into the star. He then hit forward slide, and we waited in eager anticipation. The star was seen shimmering, twisting and contorting. The light it emanated as the nuclear fuel within its core had finally run dry. Gravity then took hold, forcing the star to collapse inward upon itself. The event finally reached the point of climax, and Hydra 3267b burst into a magnificent, stellar paroxysm. The light burst outward, expanding to envelop the entire feed of the telescope in seconds. I looked over to Chelsea, who stared with wide eyes and a hanging jaw. Tears had begun to stream down her alabaster cheeks. I remained silent, not wanting to risk ruining the moment with anything I might say. After all the work she had done, and her accurate prediction, it felt only right to give her the first words. It's beautiful." Her words were anticipated by a small giggle of glee. I looked to Levi. "Is that it?" I asked half sarcastically. Levi chuckled and nodded back. "For now, at least. I'm afraid we won't be able to see much of the aftermath until the initial outburst dissipates. It should take a couple weeks at most." I turned back to Chelsea, still watching her stare in amazement at the whiteout on the monitor. I slowly put a hand onto her back, and she turned with tears glistening in her green eyes. "You did it," I said, offering a pensive smile. Chelsea wiped the tears from her eyes and grabbed my hands with a giggle. "We did it," she argued, but I wasn't about to let her off the hook. I pushed buttons and drank coffee. It was you who found it. You who said this would happen. And now it has. The world's very first glimpse of a live supernova. And it's all thanks to you. Chelsea was always too modest in my eyes and would seldom take credit for the accolades of her work. It was always us and not me for her, and although that mindset is to be commemorated on most occasions, I refused to let her live it down that day. The only reason we had achieved everything was because of her. Bob was her baby. Chelsea just smiled and melted into my arms, gripping tighter than her usual embrace. It almost felt as though her body was light as a feather in that moment, like all the stress of the years of waiting and wondering had all been jettisoned from within her and back into the universe. She radiated a glow of passion, and her touch brought serenity to my heart. If I were a poet, I'd like to think I would have written something comparing her with the cosmic burst we had just recorded. But alas, such skills had forever eluded my grasp. Well, technically it wasn't live because it happened 167,000 years ago, but it's still a nice sentiment. Chelsea looked up to me with her familiar smug grin, one she brandished heartedly whenever correcting me on technicalities. "Just shut up and be the hero for once, would you?" She smiled back, and I stared longingly into her eyes. It was like I was seeing her for the very first time, and falling in love once more. I knew it sounded corny, but after all the heartache she had been through, it felt right in that moment. Madeline would be so proud. She nearly broke at the mention, and part of me recoiled a bit. I didn't want to risk sullying the moment, but I wanted her to know it was true, and that every fiber of my being believed it. Chelsea leaned in, and her lips locked against mine. I like to think it was the best kiss of our lives. It stirred moments of our very first some 30 years ago, on a bridge overlooking a lake in New York. I was so nervous I almost flaked on picking her up, but showing up that night proved to be the best decision of my life. Love is easy at first. You go on dates and flirt like school children every chance you get. The years are the true trial, and your relationship is tested in ways you never imagined. The bills, the struggle to find work and purpose, but more than anything, it is tragedy that tests how strong your bond truly is. Chelsea and I rose to every challenge, coming out stronger than before. But then there was Madeline. She was our daughter, a cheery, green-eyed girl who loved to paint. She always used to say she wanted to be an astronaut one day, so she could wave at us while orbiting the Earth in her spaceship. I'd give anything to hear her voice again. Chelsea and Madeline were driving out to see some friends one day. The roads were slick and covered with black ice, despite the rapidly rising temperature. Chelsea lost control, and the car flipped into an embankment. Chelsea survived, but Madeline did not. It was a freak accident, and something which was in no way the fault of Chelsea. I told her that too many times to count, but I don't think she ever truly believed me. We tried for more children and tried to move on as best as we could, but it never seemed right. That day, when Hydra 3267b exploded into cosmic dust and gas, was the first time I'd seen Chelsea wear a genuine smile since it happened. What the heck? Levi's voice suddenly ripped me from my waltz through memories and back into the moment. What is it? Chelsea asked. Levi continued, scrolling through the frames of the feed, and pointed hand up to the screen. You see that? He glanced back at the two of us, and we moved in for a closer look. The feed was almost entirely bottled out by the white flash produced by the supernova, yet in the lower quadrant, there appeared to be a black line. It flashed for maybe 3 frames before suddenly vanishing. 2 frames later, and the black dot then appeared in its place. The subsequent frames that went on to show random dots and lines that would appear for a few frames and then vanish. There appeared to be no pattern nor immediate explanation for what was happening. It gotta be a bug in one of the relays, I said, offering my half-assed explanation. Yeah, maybe, Levi replied, pushing his hands on his chin as he watched the frames roll on once more. At a certain point, it just stopped, and there were no further sightings of the dots or lines. That was weird that a photometry issue seemed to have resolved itself, but at the time I didn't really put much concern into it. After all, we had a celebration to prepare for, and the real work was about to begin. For the next few days, the 3 of us obsessed over the data. We must have reviewed those frames at least a couple 100 times, trying to pick out every minuscule detail from the footage we possibly could. It took about a week for the initial flash to fade from our scopes, and then the real wonder emerged. Our various tests and analysis software seemed to confirm it was a Type 2 supernova, as we had predicted. The shards of cosmic debris had been flung for dozens of light years in all directions. One system, located approximately 50 light years from Hydra, showed signs of devastating results. Several planets in the system had received a celestial bombardment of solar radiation. If by some miracle there was some life on any of them, it was surely eradicated. Gamma-ray bursts were projected to travel outwards for hundreds of light years, but it would be a while until we were able to observe the full extent. Around the previous epicenter had burst forth a colossal cloud of gas and superheated plasma that stretched for millions of kilometers. It was beautiful, painted with all variations of color and reminiscent of a flower blooming in the spring. At the center of it, the core of the star lingered in the wild uncertainty, naked and in a radically different form than previous. Due to Hydra 3267b's colossal size, it was projected to coalesce inward and compact into an incredibly dense version of its former self. This process would give birth to what is known as a neutron star, one of the strangest and most fascinating objects in the universe. It took us a while to find it, and the resolution of the equipment had to be adjusted several orders of magnitude. But there it was. It was only a fraction of its former daunting size. The star that had once dwarfed the skies at over 3 million kilometers in diameter had been condensed down to only 60 kilometers, or about twice the distance between Long Beach and LAX. This confirmed the presence of the aforementioned neutron star, an impossibly dense object with some truly bizarre qualities. The substance that composes it, known as neutronium, is unfathomably dense. 1 single cubic centimeter would weigh nearly 50 million tons on Earth, enough to break right through the crust and do some serious damage to the planet's core. Fun fact, if you weigh about 150 pounds here on Earth, you would weigh roughly 75 million tons on a neutron star, due to its immense gravity. Needless to say, you would also be dead as shit if you tried that. That find was significant on its own right, but we had also somewhat expected it. What we didn't expect, however, was when we realized it was rotating phenomenally fast. Neutron stars are known to do this, but our star took it to another level. The incredible force of the gratitude exhibited by these stars exerts phenomenal pressure on the neutron star's crust. Because of this, they are widely unstable, and matter tends to leak from their poles when cracked in the surface. This matter is observed by anyone looking as flashes of light, which give it a sort of pulsing effect. Just imagine gluing 2 flashlights into a basketball and then spinning it around, and that's basically what was happening. We monitored the pulsing for several full cycles of analysis, and eventually calculated its rotation at about 1.36 per second, giving it about 80 RPMs, almost identical to the rhythm of the human heartbeat. Chelsea was essentially glued to the monitor by that point, and we ended up staying late into the night, still without having announced our findings in any official capacity. It's good we did that too, because not long after we discovered an anomaly, the star wasn't always maintaining its same momentum. Sometimes it would slow to only about 1/4 of a rotation every second, and others it would speed up to nearly 3 per second. It didn't make any sense, although much of what we know about neutron stars is remedial at best. Every time one is discovered, something has to be amended. We didn't notice the pattern in it at first, but we really should have. Chelsea then gasped and suddenly leaned away from the monitor, eyes trembling behind her steamed-up glasses. "Chels, you alright?" Levi asked. I just smiled. Somehow, I knew what she was about to say. "Magnetar." I couldn't help but laugh as my prediction proved accurate. "Autobots, roll out," I shouted with a laugh, but neither of them seemed to appreciate my joke. "It's a little early to be making that call, isn't it?" Chelsea shot me a furrowed brow. "Joseph, it has to be. It's movement. It doesn't make any sense." "Yeah, a lot of stuff about them don't make any sense." Chelsea seemed vaguely annoyed by my response. "Yeah, I'm gonna have to side with her on this one, Joe. She's been right about everything so far, after all." I scoffed, furthering my wife's irritation. That was just how our relationship always was, both of us always challenging the other's assertions. "Everyone's luck runs out eventually," I argued. The smug grin then returned to Chelsea's face. "Not this time. For those wondering, a magnetar is not in fact the villain from Transformers, but instead a special variation of the neutron star. The biggest difference being its magnetic field, which is so much more powerful than our own sun's that the numbers really start to become asinine. These magnetars are rare, maybe accounting for only 10% of all neutron stars, and incredibly vicious. Their powerful magnetic field acts as a buffer which slows the rotation speed, basically making them giant floating magnets of death in space. A flare from one of these bad boys is powerful enough to erase your cell phone from 100,000 light-years away. It was known that a magnetar would have a slower rotation speed, but what was unknown, and what we lacked the ability to explain, was how it was able to speed up and slow down at random. I didn't know what to make of that, and seeing as how it was almost 2 a.m. by that point, I decided to go home and sleep on it. Chelsea finally agreed to accompany me, and together the two of us left. Levi said he was going to hang around a bit longer, so we wished him a good night and headed home. The whole way back, Chelsea talked in wild enthusiasm about all the possibilities our discovery represented. The passion that exuded from her every word and the aura radiating from her was truly beautiful to see. I guess more than anything, I was glad that all her hard work and dedication had finally begun to pay off. Chelsea was out almost the instant her head touched the pillow, and soon after, I fell fast asleep beside her as well. Our slumber did not last, though, as a sudden shriek woke me up in a cold sweat several hours later. I shot up in bed, frantic and with my heart thundering in my chest. In the darkness, I heard Chelsea quietly sobbing. Chelsea, are you okay?" I asked, managing to finally flick on the light. My eyes stung as the light accosted them, but after a moment of adjusting, I saw Chelsea sitting on her side of the bed. Her knees were tucked into her chest and she was shaking. "Chelsea, what happened? Are you okay?" I tenderly embraced her in my arms, but she didn't react much. I felt her shiver and tried wrapping her in the blanket when she spoke. "Madeline," The words stuck like knives into my chest. It was just a dream, hon. I tried reassuring her, but she didn't seem to react. I'd always suspected that Chelsea suffered from PTSD with what happened to Madeline, but she had never been diagnosed. She vehemently refused therapy, and every time I brought the subject up, she would wave it off. It wasn't the first time she had nightmares. I stayed up with her after that, trying my best to confront her and silently assure her that things were all right. She didn't say much, just leaned into my chest and held me tight. I would have done anything to take away the anguish she was forced to bear. The sun finally cracked through the blinds of our room about an hour later, and I rose to put on some coffee. My focus was on my phone as I sifted through the meaningless drivel of the day's news, when suddenly a call came through from Levi. What did I tell you about calling me this early? Before I could finish the question, a harsh grinding noise rang through from the other end. The sudden digital screech felt like an arrow through my headphones and into my ear canal. I ripped it out and shouted a couple expletives, spilling my coffee in the process.
Joseph. Joe, you there? Can you hear me?
The voice of Levi echoed through the phone as I grabbed a paper towel from the spilled coffee. Yeah, I'm here. What's going on?
Are you on your way in?
We just woke up. Jesus, Levi, what time is it? Are you already at the lab?
I found something.
Levi spoke, nearly cutting me off.
You need to get in here ASAP.
I was taken aback for a moment. Levi refused to elaborate on what he was talking about, just kept urging me to get into the lab. He hung up soon after, and I went to check on Chelsea. She seemed a little more relaxed than earlier, but perked up as I mentioned Levi's call. I said he wanted us in as soon as possible, and she seemed to deflate. Did he see it too? I didn't know what she meant by that, and she didn't bother explaining. We got ourselves ready as quick as we could, and soon after rolled into the parking lot of the lab. Chelsea was out of the car and inside in a record time. Inside, we found Levi leaning half asleep on his arm at the monitor. He stirred as Chelsea scanned her card to unlock the door. There were bags under his eyes, and his shirt was stained with sweat. His cheeks were pale and his hands trembled. Oh, thank God you guys are here. Check this out. Levi eccentrically waved us over. He brought up several diagrams and the photometry analyzer program, pointing excitedly at the screen. These are the images from the initial blast, and also the ones when we saw those weird blips, remember? He looked to both of us, and I nodded. The look on his face threw me off, as it wasn't one of excitement for a new discovery, but more akin to one of utter dread. Okay, so I spent a lot of time analyzing the images, and it corresponds to no known celestial phenomenon. When displaying these images the way they were received, I noticed the pattern. He then brought out a sheet of paper with a series of dots and lines upon it, but counter to what he claimed, I saw no pattern within them. Morse code. Both Chelsea and I eyed him with outright disbelief, and he pulled another sheet of paper that had 2 words written upon it. Stop watching. That's not all, though. He then pulled a second piece of paper with even more segments of Morse code etched upon it. There were more words, too. We know you're watching. Turn back. This was the code translated from the magnetar's fluctuating pulses. I couldn't help but laugh after that, as there was just no way that what he claimed was actually possible. Levi, I think you need to get some sleep. Levi scoffed and grunted in annoyance. Oh, come on, Joseph. Measure it for yourself. It's a message. You think a dead star is trying to communicate with us using Morse code? You know how crazy that sounds, right? Levi didn't have an answer for that. Instead, he deferred to Chelsea. She seemed less skeptical than I initially imagined she might, and said nothing as she approached the terminal. I argued with Levi a bit more about the whole thing, but he refused to admit it was a prank on his part. He swore up and down what he had found was authentic, and the sheen in his eyes told me he believed it. Finally, I managed to convince him to go and take a nap, and he clearly seemed like he needed it. Chelsea then gasped from behind me and ushered Levi out. What is it?" I asked, walking towards her. She said nothing, only continued rapidly adjusting coordinates. I posed the question once more, and again I was ignored. I was about to ask a third time, when the screen zoomed in, and I found the answer for myself. Chelsea looked to me, then, her lips trembling. "It's gone," she spoke, as if solemnly proclaiming the death of a loved one. That's not possible." I stepped in and made a few of my own adjustments, but nothing I did could locate the neutron star. She was right. It had just vanished, along with all our recorded footage and evidence relating to it. How the hell? I couldn't even finish my own question, and found myself reeling for a logical explanation. "It knows we're watching," Chelsea announced, only adding to my confusion. Chels, it's a damn star. A ball of gas and plasma. It can't know anything. Don't tell me you believe Levi." Chelsea took a deep breath and spoke words that only confused and worried me more. "It hides in the stars." "What?" "In my dreams, Joseph. I saw it. It found us. It showed me." Tears suddenly flooded her eyes, and she appeared on the verge of a mental breakdown. "It showed me everything. It showed me Madeline." She started to cry, and I didn't know what to do. The email alert then echoed from the computer. I glanced back as it popped onto the lower right corner of the screen. Chelsea then darted by me and clicked on the email. The page displayed out onto the screen, and Chelsea held her hands over her mouth. I moved in and read the message. "You see me, I see you." The sender was listed only as a single family member. The sender was listed only as a single familiar name. Bob. I laughed out loud again, unwilling to engage the charade any further. "Okay, very funny, Levi. You got us. Come on out and have your laugh." I walked away towards Levi's office. He was out cold at his desk, or at least he appeared to be. Now somewhat annoyed, I began to shake him. "Levi, wake up." What? What are you doing? Let me sleep." "Levi, you're not fooling anyone. I know this was you." He groaned and lifted his head as he rubbed his face. "What was me?" I scoffed. "The email, the messages, all of this. It was all you're doing. Now just own your prank and I'll admit you had me going." Levi's eyes then shot wide open, and he looked to me with an unrivaled confusion. "Emails?" "Yes, Levi, the fucking email you sent under the name Bob. It got me, okay? Can we just move on?" Levi seemed utterly bewildered at the accusation and just shook his head. "Joe, I swear I don't know what you're talking about." I had enough of his denial and dragged him to his feet so that I could confront him with the evidence on hand. He and I stepped out of his office and into a place I didn't recognize. The lab was no longer a lab, but had inexplicably transformed into a jungle. Tall trees jutted from the ground straight into the skies, and foliage dripping with the morning dew around us. The terrestrial ambience of buzzing cicadas and croaking frogs echoed in the air around us. "Is this part of my prank too?" Levi asked, but I no longer had an answer. The two of us walked slowly into a clearing up ahead, marveling at the scenery around us. Something then caught my eye. There was a child in the grove up ahead. He was dressed in a white robe and faced away from us, but standing motionless, as if awaiting our arrival. Levi and I slowly walked towards him as we didn't know what else to do. When we got within a dozen feet, I called out, "Hello?" The kid didn't budge. We stepped closer, and twigs snapped under our feet. The kid then twitched and slowly turned around to face us. I felt my knees grow weak beneath me as I beheld its uncanny visage. It for no longer did I suspect the boy was in any way human, had a face unlike anything I had ever seen or imagined. No more than jagged black slits for eyes and a mouth, like some drunk person who carved a pumpkin. It was blurry, like my mind couldn't even properly understand what I was seeing.
Found you.
Its voice was simultaneously high and low, and caustic to my ears. Before either of us could respond, the thing began to glow. In mere milliseconds, I'd swear its luminosity surpassed even that of the supernova. I turned away, unable to bear the blinding light. But I opened my eyes. I found myself back in the lab. The forest was gone, and Levi and I were back. We both checked ourselves over, with neither of us able to reckon with what had just happened.
You saw that too, right?
Levi asked, but I couldn't even muster up a nod. My mind was reeling, and I felt panic encroach from every angle, like the black seas upon a sinking boat. Out of the corner of my eye, I then spotted Chelsea, sitting motionless at the terminal. I called out for her, and we rushed to her side. As she didn't respond, her gaze was transfixed upon the monitor. I tried getting her to respond, but she appeared hypnotized with the static upon the screen. I shook her, but she just kept staring. I was about to call 911 when suddenly she spoke.
It's here.
As soon as the words left her lips, the gates of Tartarus themselves unleashed. The static on the screens then faded to black, and a single eye then ruptured forth to breach the darkness. Eyes more numerous and inhuman than I could ever reconcile flooded the various screens, and I stepped back. The world then twisted and elongated around me in a sudden vertigo that robbed me of a clairvoyant mind. The room rippled and cracked as pillars of obsidian burst from the ground into red skies above. The lab was discombobulated, beyond all sense of rhyme and reason, yielding visions of places no human mind has ever conjured, nor eyes ever beheld. Nightmarish bubbles poured forth from the chasm, offering eldritch glimpses into an endless pantheon of worlds more innumerable than the grains of sand upon all the beaches of the earth. Beasts as large as skyscrapers stampeding along fields of glowing grass. Civilizations of countless sentient beings stretching from all iterations of time and space. Entities as large as stars gibbering and writhing in the dark tapestries of the endless cosmos. It was all too much. I could live 1,000 lifetimes and not properly describe the slightest unveiling in that moment. The unparalleled terror inflicted upon me in that moment was entirely beyond description. The visions given attested to a truth of the sheer insignificance of myself and every human being to ever exist. Somewhere deep within something stirred. A dread from the very depths of my subconscious that has suddenly been awoken. I felt the blasphemous presence of eternal quivering madness nibble upon the cortex of my mind. A primal horror that left me yearning to scurry into the darkest crevice imaginable and be entirely swallowed into non-existence. Laughter then broke my stupor, and I looked to my side to see Levi embracing something of abnormal proportions, a large, fleshy apparition with multiple heads, appendages, and reproductive organs. Levi had locked lips with one of its heads and thrust it vigorously into its dripping orifice as he laughed with the resonance of an eternally fragmented mind. I had to turn away. I knew there was no saving him. There was no saving any of us. For what hope can an infinitesimal humanity ever wager against something so vast and incomprehensible as the wretched mind around me? The menagerie around me faded into black, and I was left in the abyss alone. I looked to my hands and feet and found I was still alive, suspended or standing on a void. Before me, two silhouettes suddenly blurred and became clear. Chelsea, and Madeline. I rubbed my eyes, feeling tears surge from them and drizzle down my cheeks. I knew it wasn't possible, and yet she stood before us. Chelsea began walking towards her. "Chelsea, no!" I called out, hearing my words lose all meaning as I spoke them. Chelsea turned back, her expression stone cold but with tears dripping from her eyes. "I have to go, Joseph." I shook my head and wiped the tears. "Chelsea, no, it's a lie. All of this is a lie," I shouted, the words as loud and powerful as I could. They faded into irrelevance, and even I myself did not believe them. "No, Joseph, it's the truth. The unity of all minds into one eternal place. We are broken. We need to be whole again." I could do nothing but shake my head and cry. "Come with us," she beckoned. "Please, Daddy." That voice, the sweet voice of my beloved Madeline, a voice I had been robbed of by an apathetic world. I wanted nothing more than to embrace them both and be sealed forever in the abyss, away from the terror of life. But I couldn't do it, for in that moment I understood what it was in the most feeble way I was capable. The endless eternal consciousness who cradles in a comforting dark and the sweet caress of non-existence. A state free from pain, anger, heartache, anxiety, depression, and all other forms of human suffering. Together forever in endless shadow. The whisperer in the dark. The key to, and the guardian of, the passage. Past, present, and future, all unified into one. I have no reason as to why I refused, or how I was even capable of it. Surely the entity as vast and eternal as that thing could snuff me out without even a thought. There can be no defying it. And yet, I remained kneeling. Perhaps it wished to torment me, and allowed me to walk free and share the things I have seen. All I can say for certain is that I watched my wife and daughter fade into oblivion together, and I returned to my mortal plane. They never found Chelsea or Levi, and they never will. I was told by the time the other employees of the lab found me, I was huddled under a desk, crying and laughing hysterically, broken beyond repair from the sights I had been subjected to. I couldn't even begin to relate the things I had seen to them, and I was taken into custody soon after. Authorities wanted to charge me with double homicide, but that proved difficult when there were no victims to be found. The charges were eventually dropped entirely, and I was released from both my incarceration and my former employment. A man with nothing and no one. That thing still haunts me every night with the same nightmare. I find myself upon a barren desert with a glowing green ring lingering in a black, starless sky. I always walk towards it, and the thing hidden within starts to reveal itself. It has to be hundreds of meters tall, but beyond that, its features elude me entirely. Perhaps I am not even capable of understanding its full manifestation. There is a scale in astronomy known as the Kardashev scale. It's a rubric developed by a Russian astronomer named Nikolai Kardashev, and has pretty much become the standard for identifying the achievement of hypothetical civilization. According to this scale, Type 1 civilizations are those capable of harvesting the entire energy reserves available to its host planet. This includes petroleum, natural gas, wind, solar, hydro, and any other potential form of power that is available on a given planet's troposphere. Type 2 civilizations are those capable of harnessing the energy output of an entire solar system. This includes the other planets, as well as the host star or stars. Type 3 can harness the energy of an entire galaxy. Usually, this also includes more exotic forms of potential power, like pulsars and black holes. There is no official Type 4, but many astronomers and physicists have begun to list it alongside the others as the next step beyond Type 3. This fourth type would comprise a civilization capable of harnessing extragalactic energy sources, such as dark energy and tachyon molecules. It gets a bit complicated at this level, and most of this is purely theoretical and not yet proven science. A Type 4 civilization would essentially be equivalent to a god in our universe, and it would be capable of harnessing the energy output of the entire universe, or at the very least, countless other galaxies. As it stands now, our planet and all the feats we have achieved have amounted to us being classified as a Type 0 civilization. We do not even meet the requirements to reach the first rung of the Kardashev scale. In the grand scheme of things, we are little more than infants who have only just begun to take our first step away from the cradle. There is much hope that we may reach Type 1 by the end of this century, but there are many roadblocks in our way, especially now. It seems the scale may need readjustment, as it didn't account for one thing. Perhaps there are civilizations or entities that are entirely beyond classification altogether, things that simply can never be categorized into any meaningful group, as the mere act of perceiving them is enough to drive the most astute of men into the gibbering depths of true madness. Whatever we found exceeds the scale in exponential proportions. There is simply no way to wrap your head around it, and I know better than most, as for the last 20 years, that has been what I have tried to do. The truth is, we are children screaming into a hurricane, helpless at the whim of unimaginable forces that will forever be out of our reach. There is no retaliation, there is no fighting, and there is not even understanding in any specific capacity. This is Kardashev Type 5, the top of the pyramid, on a level we cannot even possibly hope to ascertain or truly understand. And now, after I have told my tale, I fear there is nothing more I have left to give. I have seen things beyond the scope of any mortal, and it has done nothing but leave me broken and yearning for the blissful ignorance I can never again possess. If that thing wishes to keep me alive and tormented, then I will defy it by the only means available to me. Now, I go into the howling dark to join my wife and daughter where I am meant to be. Together, forever.
When I was a kid, I would spend most of my free time hanging around with my cousins. They actually lived just a few blocks away, right over a bridge that kind of separated our neighborhoods. They were not as well off as us. I mean, once you cross over that canal, there were a lot of unpaved streets and rows of nearly identical housing. Still, I didn't really have any friends at school, and Ernesto and his friends, despite being a year older than me, totally seemed overjoyed to see me when I showed up. Maybe it's because I had better toys from my family's occasional trips to the USA. Maybe it's because I looked up to them and constantly praised them for being friends with me. We would mostly play street games like football, softball, and tag. Sometimes I would just watch TV at Ernesto's. We were both really into early anime like Mazinger, Saint Seiya, Moonlight Mask, Astro Boy, and Macross, all dubbed into Spanish, of course. Then there was Ernesto's little sister, my cousin Alma. It's hard to say she was my friend, since she was a few years younger than us, and Ernesto had no patience for her. But even then, I thought she was the nicest person in the world. Sometimes she would bring us popcorn while we watched cartoons, although it would be only half popped and almost all seeds. But for a little kid, she was really bright and kind to us older kids, who wanted nothing to do with her. I would make a point to get down on her level sometimes, and talk to her about her dolls and school, and what cartoons she watched. She was super into Heidi, and while my friends did not know it, so was I. I kept showing up over the years to hang out with Ernesto and Alma, until they moved into a big house on the edge of town. I know her dad was involved with farming. There was tractor and tomato swag everywhere in the house, but I guess he had a few good seasons in a row. That is when I started to distance myself from them. Not because they had leapfrogged us in wealth, but simply because it would take me 2 buses to visit them, and by then I had started to become popular with my own classmates. I would still see Ernesto when the whole family would get together for events, although Alma always seemed oddly absent. Come to think of it, I do not think she even had a quinceañera party, or if there was one, I was certainly not invited. Eventually I got into college in another town, and my hometown started to feel somewhat distant. Back then, there was no Facebook or anything like that. Unless you called or wrote letters, you never really knew what would happen to people. I would get little bits from my own parents that Ernesto was studying in Europe, and he was going to be an electrical engineer. But conspicuously, there was nothing about Alma. I didn't even know that she had died until I was at home visiting, and asked my parents about my cousins. They did not want to give me any details, just that it was really tragic and that my aunt and uncle have not been the same. They actually split up shortly after, but my aunt had gotten the house, so I decided to go visit her. It was a large, gated house with space for a few cars in the front and a small pool in the back. Not exactly the home of somebody wealthy, but even upper middle class sometimes felt rare where I was from. The home being so big just made it more sad, more empty, now that it was just my aunt and a maid that still stuck around. We had coffee and cookies, and she asked me all about my major, if I had a girlfriend and what I planned to do after college. But she could tell I was distracted and gloomy, so I figured I would stop beating around the bush and try to find out what I really wanted to know. I started by offering my condolences, which she politely accepted, and told me not to feel guilty when I repeatedly apologized for not showing up for the funeral. I really did not want you to know, or anyone to know, because I felt a great shame and guilt about losing a daughter. But in this town, everyone knows, and if they do not know, then they make things up. I really do not know how much longer I want to live here, just long enough that it does not seem like I ran away like my husband did right after the divorce, or like my son who won't come back. He spends every break checking towns in Europe off of his list. I apologized to my aunt and asked for my uncle's contact information so I could also tell him how sorry I felt. He doesn't deserve your pity. All of this, it is his fault. I know it in my heart of hearts. Nobody told you what happened because it was too awful. But somebody needs to know what I know, what that awful man did to our little Alma. Shortly after we moved into this house, she started coming to me with bruises and scratches. She said that she would wake up with them. She would tell us that this house was haunted, and I would tell her not to be silly. This house is barely a year old. But the bruises and scratches, those were real. I would treat them and send her to school all covered up so nobody suspected that we were doing something to her. I told my husband about it, and he seemed to get really angry.
What did you guys do?
I asked my aunt. Well, back then we were doing really well for ourselves. My husband had made some deals and sold some of his land, and we were flush with cash, so we hired a chauffeur to watch over our daughter. Anyone who grew up where I grew up knew what that meant. Yes, it is someone to drive her around, but it also usually meant a middle-aged ex-cop who carried a gun, somebody to prevent your kids from being mugged or kidnapped. When we hired the chauffeur, things got better for a while. He would stand guard by her door or her window, but a few days later, things had gotten even worse. The bruises and scratches, they were even more vicious. My heart sank hearing this, The thought of little Alma going through this was the saddest, most sickening thing I had heard. I told my husband again, who was always traveling to make money and was never around anymore, and he said that Alma must be crazy. She must be doing it to herself. I thought he was right. We had replaced the staff in the house a few times, even replaced her chauffeur, so we knew nobody was abusing her. And no matter what precautions we took, she was still getting injured. So we sent her off to Chihuahua, to a sort of sanatorium run by nuns. I guess you must know that she did not last a year there. She got out and was found dead at the bottom of the cliff. I gasped and clenched my fists. I was super angry, but I did not know who to be angry at. Even being angry at my uncle felt weird, like there is no way he had anything to do with this.
I'm sorry to ask, but what happened then, Tia?
My aunt took a big breath and continued. Well, before sending her off, we did our best to spend as much quality time with Alma as we could. Even her dad was around for that final week. We went places, we did things, and we took dozens and dozens of pictures all over the house. We knew we were going to miss her, and honestly, I did not know if she would be one of those kids who lives the rest of their lives in an institution. After she died, the businesses started to go bad, and the cash stopped flowing. My husband was not traveling anymore. All he wanted to do was drink and fight, and blame Alma for ruining everything. His self-pity, his bitterness toward our dead daughter. It was too much for me to bear, so I asked for a divorce. He is a proud man, as you know, and also stubborn, but he gave up instantly. He let me keep the house, keep the cars, and moved out telling me that this is fine. He does not need us anymore. At this point, maybe he settled down with somebody else. Who cares? And me? I just went back to teaching. My aunt was really sad at this point, but I could tell that it would be worse if I asked her to stop. She needed to talk, and I needed to understand what had actually happened. Well, like I said, he was no longer in my life, and with Ernesto in Europe and most of the staff we had gone, it got lonely around here. Finally, I realized I had never had the photos developed from that last week we spent with Alma. That is when I knew what my husband knew, that Alma was never going to get better, and that anything we did was just for our own peace of mind. I really do not want to look at it right now, but there's a photo in that cigar box over there. I went to the corner of the room, where a sort of makeshift altar had been made for Alma, with her photos and various crosses and candles with saints and the Virgin Mary. There was a rosary draped over a cigar box, which I allowed to hang loose in one hand as I opened the cigar box with the other. My fingers instinctively thumbed through the beads as I took a photo out of the box and turned it over so I could see the front. The beads dropped, and I let out a loud gasp. I heard my aunt sob softly behind me, right on cue. She knew I had seen the photo. It was a picture of Alma in her room, sitting on her bed. I had never seen her that old, a beautiful teenage girl in a flowing white dress. Little pale scars crisscrossed over her brown skin, and I could see a few bruises on her arms, but that is not what had startled me. Behind her, there was a man, who at the same time seemed to not be there. I mean, he was literally ghostly, out of place, but also without a doubt an actual real part of the photo. Even these days, I do not think someone could Photoshop something so uncanny, so unreal yet convincing beyond a shred of a doubt. He was dressed in clothes from the colonial days, in a dark, expensive embroidered coat, and with a white ruffled collar. His pale, bearded face was twisted, hateful, with his eyes reflecting the flash of the camera and peering down at Alma. He had one hand grabbing at her neck from behind, her flesh bunched slightly in between his fingers as to show his ownership over her, and his other hand rested on her shoulder. It was mangled and swollen, with the fingers chopped off at the knuckles, yet sharp cat-like claws were poking out of each stump. My aunt started talking while staring down into her coffee. Nobody else has seen that photo, outside of the church, I mean. I brought it to the cardinal, and he sent it to the Vatican to be authenticated. They keep it there in a vault full of relics, so I ended up making another copy. I really do not know why. I guess I needed to prove to myself that I was not crazy, and I had not imagined it. He really allowed this to happen to our poor Alma. I put the photo back in the cigar box and wrapped the rosary beads around it again. After that day, I was back in college, then graduating and moving to another town. These days, with the internet, it is easier to keep track of that side of my family. My cousin Ernesto is married in Europe and is a pretty successful guy. My aunt is involved with a few charities and her home is full of foster children, so I click on her links and donate whenever I can. And my uncle, something happened to him a while back, and I can only find references to it in archived tabloids. I guess he owed the wrong guys a lot of money, and they finally caught up to him. It was only news for its brutality and its sensationalism. By then, he was a nobody. There is a photo in those archives. Classic exploitation tabloid front page stuff of him tied up and bruised and covered in scratches. But the scratches are long and thin, almost cat-like. Seeing the photo did not upset me though. I hardly felt anything looking at it. It was definitely not the most awful photo I had ever seen.